Hey, I'm Kyle, and you're watching the Newfoundland Hobbyist. Hey, I'm Kyle. Such good care about this one. Proud of this Rambo here now.
The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by Mid-Island Motorsports, located in Springdale, Newfoundland. www.edgeproinc.com. By the Sea Inn and Cafe, located in Kings Point. And Outdoor Pros, located in Mount Pearl, Newfoundland.
In my opinion, the dual sport motorcycle is the most capable adventure vehicle in the world. I don't know any other machine that is as capable both on-road and off-road in terms of a legal perspective and just where you can get on it. They're amazing machines. This DR650 behind me is just perfect for me now, but I want to show you guys how I built it exactly to my needs.
I absolutely love riding ATVs, and I've been on some quite interesting rides in the last year. Their capability to do work and touring is just wonderful, but there is one drawback I find to ATVs, and that is they need to be trailered. They're not road legal. The beautiful thing about dual sport is that you can transition between highway and trail at will, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful way to adventure and tour the province. This is a new to me 2009 Suzuki DR650. These are beautifully reliable bikes, but this bike has been sitting in storage for 2 years and I don't think it saw much service before that. Everything on this bike just indicates that it was maintained very little, it's kept bone stock, and it's certainly not up to my standards. We're going to change that throughout the course of this project.
I'm just cleaning out this airbox here now, and it is horrendous. This is the worst airbox I've ever seen. This right here is the kind of sludge I was talking about, the thickness of it. That's all throughout the airbox there, so we've got a lot of muck taken out of there. So once we get a clean filter on there, it should really improve its breathing, but you've got to figure that with how dirty the filter is, how dirty the airbox is, the carburetor is probably pretty dirty as well. So and while that filter is drying, I'm going to go ahead and change the oil. I have no idea what the oil is going to look like. Maybe it was changed just before it was stored. Judging by the condition of the bike, I highly doubt it. I did run the bike a little bit, so it's nice and warm. Ooh, that is some black oil. Gonna see if the old DeWalt will break these, and it will. Lovely. Here's the old filter. Here is the brand new crispy filter. That is nice. Now, for the rewarding part, or the part that feels good, we get to dump some fresh oil in there. Castrol 10W40. Let's check out the color of this compared to that black oil. I don't have a ratchet big enough for this nut, so I'm using a wrench, and that was way too easy to break loose. That's a little bit alarming.
It's easy to see the maintenance level of this bike by how difficult it is to remove this rear shaft. The shaft should easily pull out, but without proper greasing and cleaning, it's just a chore to remove.
That's about as dry as it gets right there. Yeah, some people hang these tires themselves, but these big tires are super stiff and hard to manage, especially with tubes in there. You often damage the tubes. But besides that, I want a good balanced tire. Might not be important to some people, but yeah, I want a balanced wheel on my bike. Since it will be going on the highway, these big dual sports like this can handle the highway no problem, so I want to make sure that we have nice balanced wheels for that. Here we go, next day. I had that mounted up this morning. That is a good looking tire. Look at that beautiful lug. It's definitely going to get me higher up, but we're going to get this back on now. We're going to pack everything in grease properly. I cleaned up all the parts last night, the shaft and the spacers and everything, so we should have a much better, much smoother running rear end there now than what we started with.
Now with some increased traction to the ground, what we need is more power. So we're going to work on sorting out our fuel system next.
Now right here now, I'm just working on removing the choke assembly here. This is the choke assembly, how I just pulled it out of the carburetor. That is horrendous. And then, have a look at this. Have a look at that in there. Oh boy. There we go. Not going to be quite that easy going back in, I'm sure. And there we have it. We have, probably the first time it's ever been off this bike, that Mikuni carburetor. Now with a bit of leather in my soft-jawed vice here, I should be able to get a decent purchase on this carburetor. Nothing too aggressive, of course. We wouldn't want to damage the carburetor, but yeah, that's just a nice secure hold. Let's see. Ah, yeah. Success with the first one. Ah, come on. Sometimes different screwdrivers are just machined ever so slightly different. Ah, yeah. Didn't think. It's just this screwdriver, and this is just a cheapo one, but the tolerances are just ever so slightly off, which gave it enough bite compared to my other one. Both number 2 Phillips. And this is the part you want to be careful with. This is a soft diaphragm. This pulls a vacuum inside your carburetor. You want to get that up gently because you do not want to tear that diaphragm. So have a look down inside this carburetor here. I don't know if you can see down here or not. It's just full of grit. That's all just looks like sand and grit. Oh my goodness. So even though we got that top free, this bottom bowl did not want to come loose, and I had to cut chisel tips, you can see, slots in the top of both of those with a Dremel. And that is a great technique if you ever have trouble with a stripped out screw like that. It's not often that a chisel tip will come loose just because you have so much meat behind the paddle of the screwdriver, so you can get a lot of torque there. So we're replacing these, like I said. This is the only one I have left to get. I'm hoping we can get this one to get a good bite on there. This bike's proven to be a little bit of a pain so far. Gosh. Whew. That was a tough one.
The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by paulsfinest.com. Noble's Timber Mart with locations in Springdale and Bayvert, wildmedkits.ca, Robinson's General Store located in Middle Arm, and ABS Busing, also located in Middle Arm, Newfoundland.
It was never designed to be a full-size knife or something, right?
No,
okay, so I have stripped everything down, every little component, cleaned it down big time, washed it down with brake cleaner, Q-tips and a little wire brush, every nook and cranny, little hose. I blew out every little hose that I could, and then I reassembled with those Allen head screws in there instead of those JIS ones. So this is a beautifully clean carburetor here now. A carburetor is designed to mix or regulate air from the outside and fuel from the gas tank. It mixes the proper ratio and sends it into your engine. Now, carburetors generally have either an air screw or a fuel screw, so you can mix one. You can lean or enrichen the mix. So this carburetor has a fuel screw, so you get to control how much fuel is let in to mix with the amount of air that's already coming in. So you can't really regulate the air, not as precisely. You can mod the airbox, open up the airbox, but that's about it. Your fuel screw is how you lean out or enrich in your engine. Some engines, the fuel is kind of set, and you're able to adjust the amount of air that mixes with that fuel. So Suzuki, when they designed this carburetor, they wanted to preset the engine for how it should be, how they felt it should be stock, and then they plugged this hole here with a little piece of brass, a little brass plug, so that no one could pick at it anymore. This is bad because if you ever want to change the jetting, or if the bike isn't running well for your elevation or your humidity or temperature, you're not able to change, because all of those environmental factors affect how your air and fuel mixes. Of course, the density of the air is changing, the humidity of the air coming in is changing, so you want to change your fuel mix to accommodate for that. But because they've plugged this, you can't get at it. So we're going to fix that right now. So we're just going to drill into this plug ever so slightly. It's just brass, it's nice and soft. Oh, didn't even need the machine screw. I pulled that little brass plug right out.
With that brass plug removed, we can clearly see the factory fuel mix screw. We can just unscrew that completely, and you can see here the size comparison compared to the new ProCycle one, where we have that nice knurled knob that will extend outside below the bowl of the carburetor that you can grab onto. Now for some new spark plugs, so we can get that fuel burning nicely. All we have at this point is a beautifully clean factory carburetor. We'll work on modifications later.
If you remember, last time we had this off to maintain that chain and sprocket and get a new front tire on there. That rear axle, that rear shaft was a bit tough to pull out of there. Let's see what it's like this time. Okay, so those bolts are removed and they were a piece of cake. I just took them off with the 1/4-inch impact ratchet there, and super easy. The new sprocket just mounts right on in the same spot, but we're moving up, remember, a couple teeth, so that sprocket is going to be slightly larger there. So this is nice. This new one's black too, which I like. We'll get it bolted up and we'll move on to the front. So right now is a fine time to remove that old chain, and these are all pins through here that are basically have peen heads on them. So what I need to do, if you go with an aftermarket chain, it'll have like a clip, so you can just easily pull off a retainer clip and slip out a pin. These factory chains, of course, they didn't make them really to remove, so you got to go ahead, grind off the head, and then we'll just punch it out. And there we have it. I drove that pin through there, and you can see we have a broken chain. You can see just by looking at this piece of chain here, look how it doesn't fall. This should just naturally fall here, but you can bend those links just how you want. You can see when it hangs there.
So it's obvious that we need a new chain, but why are we changing out the sprockets? The DR650 comes stock geared very high, which doesn't lend the bike well to power. It's a very fast running bike. It runs a 15-42 combination from factory. We're going to be switching to a 14 counter sprocket and a 44 rear sprocket. That will give us more torque and a slightly lower top speed, which is a good trade-off in my opinion.
Now you'll notice with this new chain, just look how free-flowing it is. Okay, so that should really improve, will just improve everything. How smooth the bike runs, how smooth it runs on the highway, the amount of vibration in the bike, and how, and you'd have to think that it would even take a little bit of strain off the engine. Just let the whole rear end pull a little smoother, so that we can just push right through the chain like that. We're going to put our outside plate on, like so. That was beautiful. And then we just have this retainer clip here. As long as we can get this clip in over. Yeah, just that easy. That was beautiful. So here's the deal. You have this nice big 650 single cylinder engine they're very reliable, simple engines, lots of torque, lots of power. But the way the engine works, an engine or a cylinder is a combustion chamber. Again, going back to the basics. You have a combustion chamber where gas comes in mixed with air. So your carburetor takes in air through the air box, fuel from the gas tank, it mixes it to the correct ratio, sends it into the cylinder. Then once that explodes, drives your piston, all that gas from the explosion has to escape somewhere. So it comes back through the exhaust pipe. Now, as I've mentioned before, what Suzuki did to make this bike really reliable, real cheap on gas, is put a small little constricted air box, so the bike is not getting enough air through there. Really small main jet, so the bike is not getting a ton of fuel. And then just look at the size of this exhaust. I'm going to throw a picture up there now to show you the baffling system for this exhaust. It's just outrageous. This is just loaded with baffles and channels to create a lot of back pressure and to make this bike as quiet and sissy sounding as possible. And what happens is with the combination of all that, your engine is so restricted. You might be getting decent gas mileage, but you're not getting that power out of that big 650 single like you should be getting. Those two weren't too bad. Insert this mid pipe to the header pipe. Now this is just a test fit, just to see where we'll be sitting. It should be allowed to come right over like this. Time for the most daunting part of this project. So we've got that pipe on there. I was waiting for that to come in. That pipe will let us get all the air out. Now we need to get the air and fuel into the bike. See that the carb easily rotates enough. Now you can pull that slide right out of there. You have a much thinner needle, which is going to allow more fuel, and you also have a lot of adjustment. Now you can throw that needle back down in the slide, throw the slide back in the exact same way as you removed it. Now you want to rotate the carb so the bottom comes out on the other side. There we go. And there, if you remember from when we had it apart on the bench, a big main jet is just wide open right there. 155, that's a 155. So basically fuel travels through this hole in the middle. And a 155 has a bigger hole than a 150, then a 145, and so on. The bike runs a 140 from factory. So we threw that bowl back on the carburetor. The carb work is very simple. Now we have the amount of fuel we want, we're hoping, whistling into the engine. Now we need to make sure that that amount of fuel has enough air to help it combust properly. Now changing out the jet and drilling out the airbox there would be considered like macro adjustments. Then what you have is your fuel mix screw. You remember we placed it with an extended one. So what this mix screw will allow us to do is tone down, so we're kind of bottlenecking the amount of fuel that can come through that jet. Now we'll see if the bike even fires up. Remember we had to fill up that flow bowl. So we might not have enough fuel. Yeah, so I turned the choke all the way off and the bike wants to die. So we're going to have to come out more than our 2 turns.
The bike only needed a little more carburetor tuning, and once I took it out, it was a different beast altogether. This bike completely transformed from just a plain old rider to something that's just really powerful, really responsive, pulling wheelies with ease. It's just, the bike came alive. Everything I did in this project just lended to making this bike better overall and much more enjoyable for me. One of the beauties of building your own bike like this is that you get to build it to your preferences, your riding style, which is what this bike meets right now. Oh yeah, and a nice piece of steak there with some Lowry's, some extra virgin olive oil on there, and some pepper. I'm about to eat my lunch now, but I hope you really enjoyed this episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. I want to give a huge shout out to my sponsors. If you guys can support them, please go and do so. That's it for this week, guys. If you're interested in dual sport, highly recommend picking yourself up a cheap bike like this and building it and making it your own. Turning wrenches and tools like this can be so rewarding. To build your own vehicle in this way makes a vehicle so much more nice than it could have ever been just kept stock, in my opinion. It's yours, it's something you made, and with a little time, a little patience, and online resources now, you can really do so much on your own like I did throughout this project. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I hope you might have learned something. At minimum, I hope you were entertained. I want to give a big thank you to my sponsors who helped make this show possible. If you can, I'd love if you could go and support them in some way. That's it for this week. Make sure you tune in next week to to the Newfoundland hobbyist.